Wait! It's not ready!
To say the characters of the boys' universe are unsavory and downright inhuman would be a bit of an understatement. Garth Ennis really just mixed together a bunch of the worst traits humans possess into a group of superpowered, drug-fueled, homicidal maniacs, and wouldn't you know it, it worked like a monkey's paw. His original comic book series was a real wake-up call with regards to just what quote-unquote real superheroes could look like, but even the non-combatants of his series are beyond redemption. Case in point, Godolkin, who, from his brief appearance in the first episode of Gen V Season 2, looked like a harmless scientist. But in reality, he's the new Joseph Mengele, and in this video, we'll be taking a look at his origins and trying to understand just how deep his involvement in Amazon's boys-verse really goes. So, without further ado, this is Godolkin's Origins Explained. Before we get too deep into things, we do have a really quick request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. He was a deranged child molester. Godolkin's origins in comics. The name Godolkin was originally conceived as a dark mirror to the name Xavier because in the original comics, John Godolkin was created to act as the boys-verse's counterpart to Professor X, aka Charles Xavier. One of Professor X's most important achievements in his life was establishing the Xavier School for Gifted Individuals, a sanctuary for mutants of all ages where they could learn how to use their powers for the greater good in a controlled yet safe environment. Charles's obsession with gathering young men and women to his institution became something of a running joke in the comic book community, and John Godolkin is the darkest possible reflection of that joke. Why do we say that? Well, it's because unlike Charles, John doesn't possess telepathic powers, so he has to use quote-unquote other means of persuasion. He has several groups of superheroes in his employ, with the G-Men being his premier team, and he insists on calling everyone who lives on his estate his children. Indeed, John acts a lot like an obsessed parent, because he keeps interfering in his children's lives, even resurrected one of them without her consent. In the comics, one of the major breakthroughs in the boys' investigation of Vought's crimes was discovering the dazed superhero Nubia, an analog of Storm from the X-Men, who had broken free from Godolkin's mind control for a moment and ended up in an altercation that left her for dead. But John revived her because he thinks that all his children are only allowed to live the life that he decides for them, and to ensure that they all remain loyal to him, he employs one of the most disgusting methods of brainwashing we've ever heard of in our entire lives. John Godolkin would acquire his children through illicit means, either through kidnapping or by promising them a better future with him, and then, to keep them in line, he'd sexually molest them and imprint within their minds an undying loyalty to him. As disgusting as that was, Vought didn't take him off their payroll because they needed his soups for low-level missions that the Seven couldn't be bothered with. That's one of the reasons Huey infiltrated the G-Men, because if he could take away this soup farm from Vought, he'd be doing the world a huge favor. But even Vought has a conscience when it comes to pedophilia, it seems, because when they discovered John had reinstated the pre-Wiz program, where he quote-unquote taught pre-adolescent children how to become superheroes, they decided he was too dangerous to keep around. Instead of letting Billy and his pets take care of them, Vought attacked Godolkin's estate themselves and slaughtered every last person under his employ, from butlers to beaten down children, all because John was the worst kind of PR they could have asked for. What was shocking about this confrontation was the fact that several within the G-Men hated John for the abuse he put them through, but stayed loyal to him during this final stand, which was a comment on how often Professor X got away with doing some seriously questionable things to his students. Not that Charles Xavier ever took it anywhere near as far as becoming a pedophile, but he did brainwash many of his subordinates because he thought what he was doing was best for them. So, in the comics, the name Godolkin is associated with kidnapping, murder, and one of the worst sex crimes to ever exist in human history. He's a certified villain with a PhD in psychopathy because not only did he assault the kids he collected, he also genuinely thought of them as his children. But that's not the case for the Godolkin we see in the Amazon series, and while that's better in some ways, it's way worse in others, as you'll see in a moment.
Do you feel anything?
A Nazi defector who became a scientist. Godolkin's origins in Amazon's The Boys. As you might know by now, the entire premise of The Boys stems from one of the most evil ideologies that the world has ever seen, Nazism. This much is true for the comics as well. Compound V, the substance that turns human beings into soups, was developed by the Third Reich as a means to win the Second World War in absolute terms. However, that is about as far as the similarities between the show and the comics go, because in the comics, the man who developed Compound V was the Jewish scientist Jonah Vogelbaum. Once Vogelbaum discovered Hitler's plans evidence for the Holocaust, he jumped ship to America with the only surviving product of his Compound V experiment and started working for Vought American in secret. He tried getting his family to America as well, but they tragically died in the very concentration camps that he was now free from. Eventually, Vogelbaum was kidnapped by the CIA and forced to become their collaborator, creating a new strain of Compound V that the boys were injected with in order to combat all other soups. His first experiment, Stormfront, became one of the first soups to ever work for Vought, and his genes were used as the template for creating Homelander. In the show, Vogelbaum wasn't the creator of V, though he was involved with the Homelander project. Similar to his comic book counterpart, Vogelbaum grew a conscience by the end of his life and agreed to assist the boys with bringing down Vought, albeit he had to be coerced, Billy Butcher style. The actual creator of V is the Nazi geneticist Friedrich Vought, who was not only a high-ranking official in the Third Reich, he was also the man in charge of Dachau, one of the largest concentration camps that the Germans had ever established. Vought is the show's analog to Joseph Mengele. He conducted several disturbing experiments on the humans that arrived in Dachau to successfully create a serum that could alter the gene code itself. He experimented with this serum on his wife, went on to become the show's version of Stormfront, and when he saw that the Germans wouldn't last long enough in the field for his creation to help them win the war, he jumped ship to the Allies and joined America. Vought was probably one of the first people to become a part of the show's version of Operation Paperclip, and he joined America early enough to create Soldier Boy and other such heroes for them even before World War II ended. So crucial were his contributions to the war effort that President Roosevelt pardoned him despite his crimes at Dachau, and Vought went on to establish a company named after him, and the country gave him a fresh start. Frederick put on a front for the rest of his life as a proud citizen of America, his reputation being whitewashed to the level that allowed Wernher von Braun to get involved with the Apollo project, and he died as an American icon, revered in the same breath as Walt Disney and Thomas Edison. But his true goal was to continue spreading the Nazi ideology through his soups, and that's why he had his wife by his side at all times during Vaught's early years. Aryan/white supremacy wasn't a concept that was only popular in Germany. Vought realized there were many Americans who shared Hitler's views as well, which is something that mainstream American history often likes to omit. This is probably why he chose America as his relocation target instead of Argentina, like many of the real-life Project Odessa members who used the rat lines to escape to South America and be free from persecution. He slowly started assimilating like-minded individuals to realize his ultimate goal. One of those individuals was Thomas Godolkin. We don't know anything about Godolkin's past as of now, but based on the scene where Polarity and Emma enter Godolkin University's archives and discover his hidden records room, we can make a few educated guesses. Thomas was either a former Nazi himself or was seriously obsessed with Nazis, and Friedrich Vought in particular, because his secret archives hold insane amounts of Nazi memorabilia. We see swords, we see shields, we see flags, medals, books, scrolls, all kinds of things associated with Hitler's regime just sitting pretty in an American-made structure. The Third Reich symbol is prominently displayed at the back of the room, and there's a poster with a sword-like cross and an eagle with the name Vought written on it. This could have been the personal crest of Friedrich Vaught's family, or the organization he established in Germany before crossing the pond, but it's clear that Godolkin was a Vought fanboy. We even see a picture of Frederick in his secret archives and several SS uniforms just waiting to be worn again on the right side of the room. On the left side is a white hooded robe, the infamous outfit of the Ku Klux Klan, and this particular robe can be assumed to belong to Godolkin himself. Right after we see the Klan robe, we also see a picture of 4 people all wearing Klan hoods, which has been put up on the walls in quite a prominent place. We can infer one of 2 things from this picture. Both Godolkin and Vought joined the KKK after reaching America, or Godolkin was discovered by Vought at a Klan cross-burning, and he decided to take on the former as his protege. We say this because the relationship they had has been portrayed as such. Frederick Vought started Vought American by himself, but he co-founded Godolkin University with Thomas Godolkin, the only institution he ever shared ownership of with someone else. That's a level of trust he's really only shown to his wife Stormfront, so no matter how they got together, it's clear that Vought was a hero of Godolkin's. The pair established God U not to educate, rank, and draft young soups, but to study them, experiment on them, and learn what makes soups quote-unquote tick. This was one of the more shocking revelations from Gen V Season 1, the fact that students don't study at God U, they're there to be studied by God U. This means that Godolkin was not just a race supremacist, but also a geneticist of some sort, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to study soups. Superheroes in the boys' verse are basically genetically altered beings, and in order to create them, control them, or even destroy them, an understanding of their genetic makeup is crucial. So, with all that said, we hope you now understand a bit more about the real identity of Thomas Godolkin, the man who's now being pushed onto people as this educational revolutionary. He might have been a brilliant scientist who could have pushed the boundaries of genetics centuries further than anyone else, but his ideologies were decidedly Nazi-aligned, which not only made him a bad man, but also a very dangerous man. This all brings us to the main plot point of Gen V's second season, which seems to involve Thomas Godolkin quite intimately. The founder of Project Odessa. Why Thomas Godolkin is so important to Gen V Season 2. As we mentioned before, Godolkin and Vought started God-U as a means of discovering methods to control soups. This most likely stemmed from the highly erratic and unreliable nature of the soups Vought created in America, especially Soldier Boy. Sure, those guys were strong and all, and Soldier Boy even started Herogasm with Frederick's wife at one point, but they were too individualistic and unreliable to ever be capable of dedicating themselves to quote-unquote the cause. In fact, now that we think about it, Herogasm was probably created as a means to explore biological reproduction within the soup community, because being born with superpowers would have changed the whole game. So far, we've only heard of one superhero being birthed the normal way, and that's Ryan. Even Homelander, who is the model Nazi with perfect blonde hair and blue eyes, was conceived through artificial insemination. And while that's more natural than injecting people with Compound V, it isn't natural enough. Moreover, the fact that the Herogasm orgies weren't resulting in soup babies, and that the soups they were creating were mentally unstable in varying degrees, led Vought and Godolkin to create deterrents for the former's creation, and that is where Project Odessa comes in. Remember how the focus of the first season of Gen V was this mysterious project called The Woods, which was working on making a soup-killing virus? Well, The Woods was most likely a replacement for Odessa, which means that Odessa had the same goal in a different coat of paint. The first scene of Gen V's Season 2 premiere takes place in 1967, with a middle-aged Thomas Godolkin trying to break into a lab where other scientists are ready to shoot up a blue liquid into their veins. Godolkin is too late in his efforts because soon after injecting themselves, all of those scientists die in gruesome and bloody ways, with Thomas himself succumbing to carbon monoxide poisoning as a result of being trapped in the lab with them. But if you've seen our video on what Project Odessa is, you'll understand why he dedicated himself to it to such an astonishing degree. If his goal was to create soups who were capable of keeping other soups in check, even controlling and killing them as Vought saw fit, then genetics would be crucial to such a project, and Thomas was the second coming of Frederick Vought in that regard. Even his death didn't stop Odessa, which continued well after 1967, up until the year Marie Moreau was born. That was presumably when God-U shut it down, because after several failures, they'd finally had success, and there was no further need to keep experimenting on barren women with infertile wombs. It's darkly ironic that this white supremacist Nazi empathizer's greatest achievement in life and death is a black woman who's potentially stronger than Homelander, but that's the kind of twisted place the boys likes to go. So now that we all know this fact, it'll be interesting to see what we can learn about Thomas Godolkin from the series. We also know that the prequel title, Vought Rising, if it works out, will feature him eventually, so everything we've just mentioned to you guys might be contradicted by Eric Kripke's official canon and lore. But until that show drops, we're sticking with our exploration of the origins of Thomas Godolkin. Marvelous verdict! And as for this video, that's all we got for you guys. Let us know your thoughts on Thomas Godolkin's origins in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Gen V and The Boys content now that the franchise is entering its endgame. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, we'll see you guys again real soon. So until then, stay safe. If you find a weird basement lab in your college campus that doesn't show up on official blueprints, then pack your bags and books and run to the other side of the world.